The chamber was supposed to be solemn. The stakes that day were no less than the honor of those who had worn the uniform, shed blood, and come home in silence. But instead of gravity, the silence was broken by the sharp, grating sound of laughter. Tommy. Tuberville, leaning back with the smug ease of a man who mistook mockery for strength, let out a chuckle that rippled through the room like an insult made flesh. It wasn't just laughter at a colleague. It was the sneer of arrogance, the condescension of a man too comfortable playing games with other people's sacrifices. Cameras zoomed. Gasps whispered. You could feel the sting of it through the screen. Across. From him sat Representative Jasmine Crockett. She did not return a glare. She did not hurl words. Instead, there was a pause as she drew in a breath so measured it seemed to lower the temperature of the room. Her eyes narrowed, not in rage but in a stillness that made viewers lean forward. The kind of stillness that comes right before thunder cracks the sky open, because this wasn't just about her. That laugh carried an echo of every daughter, every son, every family member who had watched loved ones march into war and who never mocked, never jeered, only prayed for their safe return. The tension was a live wire, and then, with deliberate care, Crockett reached into her folder. Her hand touched a thin, faded letter, a relic from the Vietnam War, Edie's story waiting to silence him forever. Beneath the surface laughter of one senator lies something far heavier, something that touches at the very core of what America claims to stand for. Tommy Tuberville has long flaunted the persona of the coach, folksy charm, a locker room bravado, and an insistence that toughness and ridicule show strength. For some, that swagger is appealing. But in the sanctum of government, where lives, duty, and honor hang in the balance, it transforms into something else, a sneer aimed at sacrifice itself. In contrast stands Representative Jasmine Crockett. She is not simply defending herself in this chamber. She is carrying her family's lived history. Her father's service in Vietnam is not abstract patriotism. It is nights of jungle rain, letters written by flashlight, and a homecoming shadowed by scars that never truly heal. When Tuberville laughs, it is more than mockery of one congresswoman. His chuckle ricochets into the memories of veterans, the folded flags handed to widows, and the countless silences at dinner tables where a chair remained forever empty. This is why the moment matters. It's not just another political dust-up destined to be forgotten in tomorrow's headlines. It is, instead, a microcosm of the greater divide in America today. Will arrogance define strength, or will respect for sacrifice reclaim its rightful place as the nation's compass? And as millions watch through glowing screens, they sense what's coming. History doesn't always announce itself politely. It sometimes bursts into the chamber uninvited, delivered by a voice steady with dignity. Because what Jasmine Crockett is about to reveal is not merely a personal retort. It is a lightning bolt carved from blood, service, and sacrifice. And once she speaks, there will be no laughter left to echo. To understand the weight of this clash, we have to peel back the curtain on Tommy Tuberville, the man who turned a whistle and a sideline into a Senate seat, and who now mistakes his old coach's swagger for wisdom in the halls of power. For decades, Tuberville thrived under Friday night lights and Saturday stadium roars. On the football field, his style was brash, borderline theatrical, obsessed with tough guy slogans and chest-thumping declarations. This bluster may have inspired athletes, but in politics, the same tone feels less like confidence and more like condescension. What once motivated teenagers to chase touchdowns now carries into hearings as patronizing smirks and dismissive chuckles. Since entering the Senate, Tuberville has leaned on those theatrics as though the nation is just another locker room. His record tells its own story. He made headlines by stalling hundreds of military promotions, a move that left families in limbo and undermined military readiness during a global era of unrest. He justified it on partisan grounds, but veterans and military families saw through it. Leverage disguised as principle. Policy became a game, and service members became pawns. And then there are his words. Tuberville has repeatedly stumbled into controversy, tossing off remarks about race, about the military, about government itself, comments that often felt half-formed, yet delivered with the arrogance of a man convinced volume alone carries truth. The irony is sharp. A politician trumpeting patriotism while actively disregarding the sacrifices of those who live its reality. He waves flags in speeches, then undermines the very institutions the flag represents. This contradiction defines him. He embodies a brand of self-styled authority, someone who's never faced deployment, never crouched into a foxhole, never written a farewell letter under the hiss of incoming fire, yet feels empowered to scoff at those who carry those burdens. It's elitism buried beneath a facade of good old boy charm. Cinematically, you can picture the montage: Tuberville at a rally, grinning, repeating empty catchphrases with the cadence of a pep talk. Tuberville on talk shows, smirking, as he brushes aside criticism. Tuberville in the chamber, rocking in his chair, playing to the cameras like it's game day. Always confident, always loud, always convinced he's already won. That is the persona of Coach Tuberville, a man who seems untouchable, shielded by bravado, smothering dissent with bluster. For years, that swagger carried him from stadiums to Senate. But if confidence is his armor, it is also his weakness. Because arrogance blinds. Arrogance forgets that not everyone enters the room alone. Some carry deeper strength. Some carry entire legacies in whispered letters and folded flags. And for all his laughter and slogans, Tuberville was about to collide with a story far bigger, more enduring, and infinitely more powerful than himself. The persona of Coach Tuberville seems untouchable until the moment his laughter collides with her father's Vietnam letter. If Tuberville came into politics carrying swagger and slogans, Jasmine Crockett arrived with something infinitely harder to manufacture: purpose. Her journey doesn't begin in marble hallways or camera flashes, but in a small Texas neighborhood where justice wasn't theoretical. It was survival, and fairness was something you had to fight for. As a child, Jasmine was raised on the twin principles of justice and hard work. Her parents instilled in her the lesson that integrity isn't optional. It's the compass by which you navigate every storm. Chores weren't simply tasks, they were discipline. Standing up for others wasn't advised, it was expected. And behind those values stood her father, a man who had known jungles halfway across the world, who had written shaky words on thin paper under the heavy air of Vietnam, and who returned home with memories too searing to often speak aloud. Jasmine's education wasn't just about textbooks and classrooms, it was about watching her father's quiet dignity. He rarely told war stories, but his silence taught volumes. That sacrifice is not glamorous, that patriotism isn't a slogan, that pride sometimes means enduring what others cannot imagine. His one act of vulnerability, the letter he wrote overseas, became a testament not just to his service, but to his humanity. That letter, folded and kept through decades, remains the physical proof that courage is spoken not in cheers, but in whispers. Driven by that moral inheritance, Jasmine pursued law, not corporate corner offices or prestige, civil rights. She stepped into courtrooms on behalf of tenants on the edge of eviction, workers undermined by exploitation, families intimidated by systems designed to break them down. In every case, she wielded justice like a blade honed by empathy, a blade lit from her father's torch. Clients didn't just see her as a lawyer, they saw her as an ally who carried their dignity as if it were her own. Her rise in Texas politics was not carved out by handshakes with the powerful, but by handshakes in community centers, church basements, and on sidewalks where neighbors argued about potholes and policing. She represented the kind of leadership rarely televised: messy, raw, relentlessly rooted in the people least likely to be heard, and when she entered Congress, she brought that same fire. On the floor, her words snapped with precision, but her tone carried something unusual in politics today: sincerity. The kind of sincerity that makes opponents bristle because it exposes their hollowness. For many, she became more than just another representative. She became a voice who carried with her the whole weight of a family defined by sacrifice, and a father's voice preserved in ink. Cinematically, you can picture the montage. Jasmine as a girl at the kitchen table, listening to her father quietly, unfold fragments of his service. Jasmine buried in law books, scribbling arguments that few thought she'd win. Jasmine at rallies, surrounded by ordinary Texans, speaking plain truths without apologies. Always steady, always determined, always propelled by a mission larger than herself. So when Tuberville laughed, it wasn't just a man ridiculing a woman in Congress. It was arrogance colliding with an entire lineage of service, courage, and justice. A lifetime of struggle condensed into a single heartbeat. And at the height of his derision, Jasmine Crockett did not snap back, did not hurl insults, did not mirror arrogance with arrogance. She reached deeper. She remembered that folded page. She channeled all that history, her father's trembling, words resting just on the edge of revelation, ready to silence the laughter with truth no man could mock. The chamber that afternoon had grown into a theater. Conversations hushed, the squeak of chairs went still, and all eyes locked on the verbal duel unfolding before them. Tuberville, emboldened by attention, leaned forward with the swagger of a coach scolding a rookie. His voice carried the rhythm of a pep talk turned sour. Snide remarks dropped like pebbles into still water, each ripple spreading disdain across the room. He tossed out dismissive comments, waved his hand in mock amusement, rolled his eyes like a man too amused by his own performance to notice the storm he was summoning. Every quip was meant to reduce Jasmine Crockett, to strip her words of weight, to present her as a figure to be laughed at. And yet, the more he jeered, the less powerful his laughter seemed, because Crockett did not react. She bore the weight of his smug performance in silence. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't flinch, she just let him speak, and with each second the tone of the room shifted, because restraint can be louder than shouting. Where Tuberville's energy flared and sputtered like cheap fireworks, Crockett's calm became a thundercloud, gathering gravity, making the room itself feel heavier. Spectators felt the pause stretch. It wasn't weakness, it was anticipation, like the long moment before a downpour breaks, like the air when a storm is about to unleash itself. Every second of her stillness magnified Tuberville's bluster until it seemed cartoonish, hollow, undeserving of the stage he thought he owned. You could feel it in the way heads began to turn, not at him, but at her. They weren't waiting for another one of his jabs. They were waiting for her moment. They knew something was building. The only question was when. Then, as Tuberville's chuckle faded into his own echo, Jasmine calmly reached into her folder. The room shifted. She didn't shuffle papers hurriedly. She moved slowly, deliberately. Fingers found an old page. Its edges were softened by decades. Its ink bore the wobble of a soldier's shaking hand. And at that instant, laughter evaporated. Every smirk, every scoff, every ounce of arrogance bled out of the room, because before her, on that fragile paper, was something no ridicule could erase. The chamber had gone so still that even the shuffle of paper echoed like thunder. Jasmine Crockett unfolded the fragile sheet, the crease lines showing its age. It wasn't just a letter. It was time itself, preserved in ink. She breathed once, steadying herself, then began to read. Her voice was calm, but beneath it quivered the weight of decades. The words weren't political talking points. They weren't snappy one-liners for headlines. They were the raw confession of a young soldier penning his fears, his duty, his aching love for home while surrounded by the roar of war. He spoke of the rain that never stopped falling, of nights when darkness felt endless, of comrades he prayed would make it back alive. He wrote, not to boast, but to remind his family that service meant sacrifice, that he bore hardship so they could sleep safe oceans away. Each sentence was thick with devotion, not to a party or a politician, but to a country he believed was worth the pain. The chamber shifted with every line. Members leaned in. Some clasped their hands. Others lowered their heads as if in church. Cameras clicked like nervous teeth, desperate to capture the moment. There were murmurs, too, soft gasps when her father's fear bled through, when his love for home wrestled with the exhaustion of battle. Through it all, Crockett's composure never cracked. Her voice did not rise to meet Tuberville's mockery. It remained steady, imbued with dignity. At moments you could hear it tighten, threatening to break, but she would not let it. Because this letter was not weakness. It was strength. The kind of strength arrogance can never imitate. And across the room, the transformation was visible. That smirk, so practiced, so comfortable, dissolved from Tuberville's face. His posture slumped, his arms folded tightly as though to shield himself. The letter was no longer her weapon. It had become his mirror. In every word, he saw the hollowness of his own laughter. By the final sentence, the suspense was unbearable. Crockett's voice hushed, carrying the weight of her father's closing words. Then, silence. The chamber didn't breathe. Seconds ticked like hours. And then, from the back, a single clap, it spread, faster and louder, until the entire room erupted in uproarious applause. It rolled through the chamber like a tidal wave. Reporters on the balconies stood. Staffers rose to their feet. Veterans in the gallery wiped tears. And somewhere, under the avalanche of validation, Tommy Tuberville sat small, swallowed by the silence between claps. What happened inside that chamber refused to stay inside. Within minutes of Jasmine Crockett's final words, the walls of Congress seemed to dissolve outward into phones, feeds, and television screens across the country. The first posts were instantaneous, short clips of her reading, spliced with Tuberville's awkward squirming. By the time the gavel fell, the hashtags were already climbing. Letter of Honor. Tuberville Speechless. Vietnam Truth. Each one spreading like wildfire, igniting timelines with fragments of dignity versus arrogance. Memes followed within the hour. Side-by-side screenshots flooded Twitter and TikTok. Crockett, steadfast and focused, facing off against Tuberville, caught mid-smirk, his posture collapsing as reality overtook his swagger. One viral caption read simply, "Laughter meets silence, and silence wins." Another painted Crockett as a modern-day David, letter in hand, standing firm as Goliath blinked. Then came the veterans. Groups posted tributes within hours, thanking Representative Crockett for reminding the nation that sacrifice cannot be mocked. Letters from spouses of soldiers, parents of Marines, and children of veterans poured in, each echoing the same sentiment. She didn't just read her father's words, she read ours too. Cable news anchors replayed the moment with reverence. Commentators who rarely agreed on anything agreed on this. Tuberville had walked into the chamber armed with condescension and walked out diminished, while Crockett had elevated herself into a symbol larger than politics. Meanwhile, Tuberville's team scrambled to spin the narrative. Press releases downplayed the laughter, aides defended his sense of humor, but no press secretary can outrun an internet that smells insincerity. The viral images had sealed their own verdict, and in living rooms, classrooms, and social feeds nationwide, the conversation shifted. Nobody was asking who won the exchange. The question had evolved, growing larger than any single headline. Because in every corner of the country, people felt it. This wasn't just about a laugh in Congress, It was about the definition of honor. It was about what kind of nation America still wishes to be. When the thunder of applause finally subsided, what lingered wasn't just the victory of one representative over one senator, it was the reclaiming of a deeper truth. Jasmine Crockett hadn't lashed back with insults or matched arrogance with fire. She had chosen a path infinitely harder, to answer ridicule with dignity, to counter a laugh with a letter, to highlight that courage exists not in swagger, but in sacrifice. Her words transformed the atmosphere. The Vietnam letter her father had written decades ago became more than a family keepsake. It became a national mirror. In its faded ink was the reminder that patriotism is not the property of politicians who wave flags while sneering at service, but of those who quietly bear the cost. Crockett reframed the clash. It was never really about her versus Tuberville. It was about dignity versus mockery, respect versus ridicule. It was about whether America values loud arrogance or quiet courage, whether we measure strength by who can laugh the loudest or by who can stand the firmest when laughter tries to belittle truth. She had shown that truth always endures. Even when someone scoffs, even when arrogance tries to drown it out, truth bides its time, steady and patient, until the right voice speaks it aloud. That day, the right voice was Jasmine Crockett's, carrying not just her own words, but the lived memory of a father who once wrote from a distant battlefield with trembling hands. And that is why viewers didn't just applaud her, they were moved. Because it was never only about politics. It was about what kind of people we choose to be, what kind of nation we strive to preserve. And so the question isn't whether Tommy Tuberville lost that day, because his smirk told that story before. The applause had even stopped. The real question is whether America will remember the lesson Jasmine Crockett delivered. Tommy Tuberville laughed. That much is undeniable. He laughed in the face of history, in the face of dignity, in the face of a woman who carried her father's sacrifice into that chamber like a shield. But what happened next? The moment Jasmine Crockett unfolded that letter and spoke words born from jungle shadows and battlefield silence was the turning point. His laughter evaporated, his swagger collapsed, and the smirk that had carried him from stadium sidelines to Senate speeches was erased by a force he could never imitate. Honor. What unfolded that day was not a partisan skirmish. It was something deeper, something purer. It was the collision of shallow arrogance with enduring sacrifice. It was the reminder that true patriotism is not loud, not flashy, not mocking, but steady, humble, undeniable. That's why this moment traveled far beyond the chamber. It wasn't just that Tuberville looked small. It was that Jasmine Crockett reminded an entire nation of what towers above politics: service, respect, and truth. And that's why this channel exists, because every time arrogance tries to eclipse dignity, we shine a light back on the truth. If you believe that truth should never fold in the face of ridicule, if you believe that laughter cannot erase sacrifice, then join us. Subscribe, share this story, and become part of a movement that refuses to let arrogance dictate the narrative. Because every time the smirk fades and the letter is read, dignity wins. And dignity, unlike arrogance, never goes out of style.